All right, good morning, everyone.
Can I
Hello.
start?
Welcome. I'm really excited this morning to have John Lowe here speaking. Ty Boyd Communications. I'm not sure how many. Raise your hand if you're familiar with Ty Boyd. Just all right. So they've been in Charlotte and kind of a staple of Charlotte for a very long time. Ty Boyd used to be on the radio, so some of you may have heard his voice back in the day. And they taught executive coaching in Charlotte. And back in my hospitality days, I was at the Hampton Inn and Suites South Park. And so we hosted their classes at the hotel. And I was fortunate enough to be able to go through the training. And it was amazing. It's very intense, 3 days, but it was so fun. And I learned quite a bit. And the family is just amazing and wonderful. And so I was thrilled that John could come and have this conversation with us today. His bio is online. You've gotten that with all of your communications. So I didn't want to go and just read that, but John has been with Ty Boyd, I guess officially for 5 years, but unofficially for about 45 years. So quite a long time. And he took their class in 1984. So
I was only 10.
We don't want to date you there, Todd, but just wanted to point out that he is a leader in this industry and definitely knows what he's talking about. And so we're just thrilled to have you here today. Thank you.
Thank you. The three things that the average human being physically does most every day. One, we breathe. The average human being takes 17,000 breaths a day. The second is we blink. The average human being blinks 11,000 times a day. What do you think the third is? What I'm doing right now, talking. The average person speaks 7,000 words a day. Now, I know we're here to talk about the difficult conversation, and we're definitely going to get to that. But I want to first talk about the conversation. I want to talk about communicating verbally between human beings to kind of set up how we deal with the difficult conversation. And it's very interesting to me that we speak 7,000 words a day. This is the primary way that we communicate with each other. Yet very few people invest any time or resources into improving the way you communicate personally. Now, I'm sure many of you probably have invested some time and resources into improving something that you like to do, a hobby or a sport. Maybe it's playing the piano, maybe it's tennis or golf, or maybe it's cooking or something of that nature. But when you think about the fundamental thing of communication, the fundamental way we talk to each other, the fundamental way we do business, isn't it interesting that very few people invest in that? And I think there's a really good reason for that. The good reason for that is we've been doing it our whole life. You've been talking since you were 2 years old. And as you got older and as you got better at it, you would talk, people would hear you, and things would happen. Now, they're not always good things. Sometimes good, sometimes bad, sometimes indifferent, but things happen. So the process of communicating was working for you. And in life, when we don't have pain, not necessarily physical pain, but emotional pain or financial pain or what have you, pain indicates a problem that needs to be solved. And so with communicating, when things are working and people are listening to you and things are happening, you don't feel the pain, so there's no necessity to invest in it. And I think that's the main reason why people don't do it. Now, the incredible thing that I want to share with you is through my career, and I was 45 years in sales, selling technology to education, primarily higher education, all over the country. And what I found was being able to do what I'm doing right now, being able to sit across a conference room table with 10 people and have a meaningful conversation was an incredible competitive advantage for me. Now, I don't know all the industries that are represented here. I took a quick look at the list, but I know it's widespread. There's a lot of different types of businesses here. But regardless of what your business is, regardless of what you do for a living, regardless of the network that you may have or may not have, being able to be a strong communicator, an effective communicator, a motivating communicator between people is the strongest, best competitive advantage you can have. It's more of a competitive advantage than if you have a great product or service. It's more than if you have a great organization with great customer support. Being a great communicator instantly puts you above 90% of the people you will compete with, not only for the business, but in your organization. Because even though if we're in an organization of any size, we're peers with people in that organization, but we're also friendly competitors with them. We're competitors for advancement. We're competitors for more responsibility, for more pay, for whatever it might be. So being a great communicator pays off there as well. And I'm not going to spend any time talking about this today, but I do want to throw in from the personal side. How many times have you had a personal issue and it maybe got really contentious, maybe it became a really serious issue, and you can trace it back to miscommunication? Yeah, I see everybody's head nodding. Of course, we've all been there. So if you're a better communicator, you minimize those things in your personal life. So we're going to talk about business because you're all here for business. That's why you belong to this great chamber here in Charlotte. And I want to tell you about, from a business standpoint, why this is such a competitive advantage. Now, if you think about it, for example, if someone asks you what you do, how do you respond? Let's just pick somebody. What do you do for a living? Hey, nice to meet you. Yeah. Yeah, what do you do?
I help companies reduce internal pressure and help them increase capacity.
Okay, great. Matt, what do you do?
What do I want to know? No, but seriously, I am a national title insurance provider across the United States. My clients are all over.
Okay. Back, what do you do? Yes. Okay, great. Now those are three perfectly fine responses. Frankly, there are three pretty boring responses. And that's the way most people respond. If they ask you what you do for a living, you verbally hand them your brochure. And it's not that exciting. So imagine if you could communicate what you do in terms of a story. Imagine if you could tell somebody a very quick little 90-second vignette of how you help somebody achieve something or overcome a problem. And that explains what you do. Now that person that's listening to you might be able to put themselves in that story, see themselves with that problem, and say, wow, maybe you can help me. When you hand them your brochure, that doesn't happen. Yes?
I help people make connections. At our last business expo, one of the people that had a booth there actually got 2 signed contracts while at their booth at our expo.
Yeah. Yeah, it's all because you have those minutes of opportunity with somebody who may become a prospect. And so if you hand them your brochure, here's the thing, the world has changed so much, and I'm going to date myself again, but believe it or not, there's a couple of people in here that can nod with me and verify that they're in the same situation. Believe it or not, the first half of my career, there was no internet. I mean, really? I've said to the young people in here going, you got to be kidding me. What are you, 100? There was no internet. And so as a salesperson, prospects would call me when they have a problem and they want me to come see them because I am their source of information. I'm the one that's going to tell them about our company history. I'm going to tell them about how we go about building products or services. I'm going to tell them about how our customer service works. I'm going to tell them how our product works. I'm going to tell them about pricing and so on and so forth. They need me for that information. Guess what? They don't need you for that anymore. Because you know when you have a problem and you're looking for somebody to solve that problem, or a company, what do? You go to their website and you research them. So you need to understand when you talk to somebody, chances are if they've reached out to you, they already know all that stuff. They've looked at your website. What they want from you is something different that they don't know, or they want to know how to apply the information they already know in a different way. So you have to understand that in terms of going back to how you tell your story. You have to say something that's going to get them energized about learning more, about maybe putting themselves in that process. If I were to ask you, what are the two most important things in building and maintaining and growing a business relationship? You might say, having a great product or service, being very competitive in pricing, having wonderful customer support, being available whenever the customer needs me. There's all kinds of things that you could say. I'm going to tell you in my experience what I've found the two most important things are. Like and trust. People prefer to do business with people they like and they trust. How do you communicate likability and trustworthiness? Two ways. One is you demonstrate it, but before you can demonstrate it, you have to talk about it. You have to speak and communicate in a way that tells them that you're somebody that they may like and may trust to do business with. That's why this is so vitally important from a business standpoint to be a great communicator. I train a lot of business people, a lot of salespeople, a lot of sales leaders, and I talk to them about this, and it blows me away when we get into some role plays or I dig a little bit deeper and I start talking about what they do. It amazes me how bad they are at communicating likability and trustworthiness. Because they forget the number one thing about communications. I'm going to give you now a 4-word statement that will change your life if you implement it in the way you communicate. If you have something to write down, I encourage you to write these 4 words down. You ready? It's not about you. It's not about you. When you're going to talk to somebody about what you do, let's say you have a presentation set up, what do you think about? Oh, we got to talk about our great company history. We got to talk about our place in the market. We got to talk about our products and services. We got to talk about how we work and customize everything for them. We got to do. It's not about you. It's about your audience. However you're communicating, if it's one-on-one across a desk or in a hallway, if it's 1-on-10 around a conference table, if it's 1-on-50 in a room like this, if it's 1-on-1,000 in a theater somewhere, your communication is all about the audience, whoever that is. It's all about understanding what they need. How do they need to hear about this that's going to make a difference for them? What can I talk about that's going to move the needle for them? And many times, when you build what you were originally going to talk about, based on you and your company and your services, and then you think about it from, if I'm sitting in the seats, does that make any sense, or is that something I'm going to be interested in? You're going to find that you change it. Because from that perspective, it doesn't matter. They already know that. Or that's not important to them. It's important to us, but it's not important to the customer or the prospect. It's not about you. I'm going to say that 3 or 4 more times over the next half hour. But it's so vitally important for you to understand when you communicate with people. And it's really important when we talk about the difficult conversation. It's not about you. Now, I want to talk real quick about what I call the language of leadership. Many of you in here are in leadership positions, I imagine, in your organization. Maybe you own the organization. There's something about the language of leadership that I have experienced in my life. And I worked for, I calculated some time ago, in my 40 plus years, I worked directly or indirectly for 24 people. Of those 24 people, I would consider 4 of them leaders. They were all in a leadership position. They all had a leadership title. But only 4 of them rose to the rank of leader. The rest of them were managers of the business. They weren't bad people. I liked many of them. I enjoyed working with them. But they weren't leaders. They didn't use language of leadership. And there's 3 particular things that I've identified that I think are important. The language of leadership sounds like using we and us instead of you. Instead of saying, you've got this big challenge this quarter that you've got to figure out a way to do, or you had that problem last week with that customer and we've got to figure out how to solve it. It's we have the challenge. We have the problem. We are going to work on it together. A great leader is part of the team. The great leader doesn't sit above the team. A great leader says we and us, not I and you. Now, the second thing, as far as a language of leadership, is ask. Ask your people on your team for their input. Give them some ownership in what's going on. And then, here's the important part, operate and act on that information. That doesn't mean you have to do what they say or recommend. But what it means is, if you're not going to do it, you go back and explain why. Now, I've had in my career many sales leaders, sales managers, who would ask for our input from the field, and then it never saw the light of day after that. And there was no reason. It's just, oh, yeah, we're going to do this. Instead of saying, hey, you gave us an idea, a great idea, but when we researched it and figured out, here's why we can't do that. So, but keep coming up with the ideas because we like them. So ask your people for input. When people are part of building the plan, they have ownership in the plan. They're more invested in its success. When somebody at the top just tells these people what to do, they're not as invested. So ask is a big one. Now, the third one is recognize. The top performers in any organization, those that overachieve, they're always recognized. They're always put up on stage. They're always given the incentive trips. It's easy for them to be recognized. But in any organization, the people who really make it successful day to day are those people who just show up every day. They put in their shift. They do their job the way they're supposed to do it. If you look at any sports team, you may have one or two star players, but don't you have a whole bunch of role players? They're good players. They do their job. They know what their role is. And without them, the stars wouldn't be stars. So I found that people who are real leaders recognize everybody who contributes, not just the greats, not just those people who go above and beyond. So if you're in a leadership position in your organization, think about those three things. We and us, ask and act on what you receive, the information you receive, and then recognize all the contributors on your team. I want to talk for a minute about something near and dear to my heart, and that's sales. Now, many of you may be salespeople, many of you may employ salespeople, many of you may be the only salesperson in your organization, and you go out and deal with all the prospects and all the customers and all the clients. Talking about this thing of communications is so incredibly important in sales because I go back to like and trust. That's how you're going to get clients. That's how you're going to keep them. And what I've found invariably with salespeople, especially younger salespeople, is they can't wait to present the solution. It's all about them. And if you think about it, salespeople are under incredible pressure. Let's look at all the ways a salesperson's under pressure. First of all, they have the pressure on themselves that they put there. They've got this job, they want to succeed, they want to make money, they're under that pressure. They have pressure from their family or significant others or what have you that are expecting them to succeed and bring in some money. They have the pressure of, think about it, they're hired, their very job is to close business. That's why they have a job. So they have that pressure. They're expected to close these deals. They have the pressure from their manager because their performance, good or bad, reflects on their manager's performance, good or bad. So they've got that pressure. Then they've got that quota number sitting out there. This is the number they're supposed to hit. And it's always there. It's like this dark cloud hanging over their head all the time. So you can imagine when a salesperson goes in to make a sales call, they've got this incredible weight on their shoulders, this incredible baggage that they lug into the sales call, and they sit down, and this bag sits down with them, and now they're expected to have a sales conversation. They don't know how to do it. They don't know how to do it. What I learned was, and I virtually did this to remind myself early in my career, I started watching people around me, my peers, my fellow salespeople, and they were under all this pressure, and they hated, they're just looking at the numbers every day and driving themselves crazy. And I thought, this shouldn't be this hard, because this is a people business. People have a problem. They want it solved. I might be able to solve it. Why can't I just go in there and have this conversation? Why do I need to drag all this other stuff with me? And so I started, when I got to the sales call, and when I got to the door of the office or the room I was going to go into, I literally took the baggage off my back and sat it on the floor. And when I opened that door to go in, I thought my only reason for being here, my only goal for today is how can I help this person today? In whatever that form that takes. And that's going to be the basis for my conversation. And guess what? Two things happened. I started to get incredibly successful. And number two, I started to have a hell of a lot more fun. Because I'm just talking with people. I'm just meeting people. I'm engaging in what they're involved with. I'm listening to their stories. And that's all it is. It's a people business. It doesn't have to be that hard. We make it hard. On top of that, the training that we put our salespeople through makes it hard. Now, I'm not saying it's not good training, but none of the training, I've been through all kinds of sales training programs. None of the sales training deals with the psychology of the salesperson. They all deal with the psychology of the buyer. They all deal with the process of putting somebody through the steps to get them from introduction to close. And so they put these salespeople out there thinking about this process. How can you have this normal conversation when you're thinking about ahead? They're saying something, you're thinking, oh, well, if he says that, I've got to say this. And that's going to lead to that. Oh, wait a minute, it didn't go there. Now what do I do? Oh my gosh, now I'm panicking. Oh, you want to see the brochure? That's what I fall back on anytime I panic. I got my brochure, let's talk about the product. Because I know I'm screwing up here. I'm not following the process. So we put that extra burden on the sales rep by putting them through this training and not talking about, we understand your pressure. We understand what you're dealing with. Let's just go have a conversation. And we as sales leaders, let me go with you and let me show you how this is done. Let me show you. And it's okay. We're not going to close any deal today. That's okay. Let's start building likability and trustworthiness with this prospective client. That's why this communication stuff is so important for you. It's so important for you to get good at it. Because when you have meaningful conversations with prospects who have a legitimate problem and something you could solve, when you start to build that likability and that trustworthiness, you move ahead of your competitors who just show up and talk about products and features and benefits and price. So that's why this is so critical. So I wanted to kind of set that framework to encourage you all to really think about investing in yourself and investing in the way that you communicate so that you can start building that likability and trust factor so you can start getting more business. That's what you're in business for, I hope. And it's not just a tax write-off. Does all that make sense? Questions before I move forward? Yes.
I was going to say that, first of all, thank you for
You're welcome.
sharing your wisdom. And I'm in sales. I'm vice president.
Great.
And it's very refreshing hearing you state what you just said, because that's what I have found my role to be successful. Because there's First American, Chicago Title, Old Republic, they all offer the same services.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? But what has differentiated myself from my competitors is exactly what you just stated. Understand meaningful communication, understanding what the problems they've had with my competitors.
Mm-hmm.
How can I network with them and introduce them to third-party providers for their clients and forging a trustworthy relationship with them where I care and I have now become a partner within their business.
Right.
So when one is able to do that, one is able to succeed because now they're able to see a clear distinction between my role and the role of others in the same business that I'm in. So to your point, bravo. I mean, you couldn't have said it much more clearer than that.
Great.
That really, really works. And I, for one, being a Latina woman, I love to talk. So I've always had to train myself that I have to be quiet and listen. You know, I have to learn to listen because I get excited.
Right.
And so I've had to learn that first. And then once I learned that, I was able to clearly understand my clients' objectives, their business objectives, and how I can, you know, assist them in those objectives. Thank you.
Thank you for that. That's wonderful. And thank you for bringing up something that I also wanted to share with you all. You've all heard of the personality profiles that you can do, Myers-Briggs, DISC, whatever. I don't know how many have ever taken one. Many? Yes, most. Good. Here's the value of those in communications. First of all, there's two things. One, understanding yourself and how your personality affects the way you communicate. If you are a high D driver person, bottom line, let's just get it done, I don't have time for stories, yada, yada, that's the way you communicate. You talk fast, you get to the point, and you don't have patience for people who don't do that. So you have to understand that's what makes you communicate the way you do. Here's the more important part. Understanding others that have different personalities than you, and how can you adapt to their way of communicating? Because I go back to what are those 4 big words? It's not about you. It's about who you're talking with. So if I discover that the person, I am a high D person, I find that the person I'm talking about starts telling me the story about their vacation last month and all their kids in school and all this stuff. Ordinarily, my eyes would be rolling and I'd be ready to just, blow my brains out. Let's get just, I can't stand this. It's not about me. So I'm going to change. I'm going to adapt. And I'm going to say, oh, that's really interesting. And then I'm going to tell them about my vacation. And I'm going to tell them about my kids. Because I'm matching the way they want to communicate. It's not about me. The reverse is true. If they are the bottom line oriented person, and I like to tell stories, I like to talk, I like to share stuff. And I realize they say, we got this problem, I really want to solve it. What do you have for me? They didn't tell me any stories. They're just going to get right to it. I'm going to get right to it. I'm going to withhold that story that I wanted to share with them. So if you haven't taken those personality tests, or one of them, I'd encourage you to. If you have, use it to think about how you communicate and how you can adapt to those that you're communicating with.
Why?
Again, you're in the people business. I don't care if you're in cleaning services or financial services or education or what you do for a living. The bottom line is you're in the people business. So learning how to communicate with them is going to be the key to easier and more consistent success. Any other questions before I move forward, or observations? No? All right. So let's move now towards what you came here for, the difficult conversation. But I'm going to talk about first something that if you don't do this well, you can't manage difficult conversations. How many of you would consider yourselves to be good listeners? Yeah, I love this. Some people with hands go right up. I love the ones that go, yeah, maybe. Depends on the situation. Ask my husband or wife. My guess is, even for those that said yes and put your hand up, if we asked your spouse, significant other, mother, father, best friend, they'd go, sometimes. Depends on the situation. I want to talk about intentional listening. If you're not good at this, you're not going to handle tough situations. If you're not good at this, frankly, you're not going to be in that position of becoming a trusted advisor instead of a salesperson, instead of just a representative of your organization. Intentional listening means, first, we have to recognize 4 words again. It's not about me. It's about whoever I'm going to talk to. They have to be the most important person in your life at that moment. They have to be the only thing that interests you at that moment. You have to exclude all other thoughts. You have to stop thinking about that tough conversation you had an hour ago, or that lunch that's coming up that you don't want to go to, or the fact that your car broke down on the way to work and you're really ticked off about that because you just got it fixed. All these other things that may be in your head. And you have to understand they all go away, they compartmentalize, and I'm just going to focus on this person in front of me. It's not about me. It's about the person I'm listening to. Now, the second thing is, I want you to think about not just listening to what they say, but I want you to listen to their face. I want you to listen to their gestures. I want you to listen to their expressions. Because they may be saying something, but their face may tell you something else. The way they say it, the way the expression happens when they say certain things may exhibit the fact that this is a very emotional thing for them. I had someone, a dear friend of mine one time, and I had just gotten back from a trip to Italy, and we were having dinner together, and I was telling her about this trip, and it was the most amazing thing. She was listening to me, but I'm describing things in Italy and all this stuff and with my hands. And I found her listening to my hands. She was watching my hands and intently observing the way I was talking about this. It was so fascinating to me. And so you got to listen to all these expressions and all those other things. Then the third thing is listen for the emotion involved. How does this story, this issue, this whatever, make that person feel? What emotions are coming through? I don't know if you're all aware of this fact, and this is very important for doing business with people and for sales especially, that everybody, every human being on the planet makes decisions based on the emotional side of their brain. One side collects information and stores it, doesn't judge it, doesn't do it, just keeps it there. And when you're going to make a decision, the other side reaches over and grabs what it needs and then thinks about what's in this for me? What does this mean to me? What does this mean to my organization? How is this going to affect us? They're emotional decisions. So when you're listening, when you're intentionally listening to somebody, you want to listen for the emotional connection because that's what you should react to. That's what you should play on. That's what you should try to solve or try to reinforce. That's how that person's going to make a decision based on this issue that you're talking about. The next really important thing, don't listen while thinking about how you're going to respond. Again, I see a lot of nods or a lot of shaking of the head. It's common. We all do it. It's human nature. We all do it. You have to eliminate that and just really listen. You'll have time to formulate your response. And guess what? You'll probably hear or observe something that will change the way you respond. It will be different from what you thought you were going to say. So make sure you're not thinking ahead. You're not thinking about what it is that you're going to respond with. Here's the last thing for intentional listening. Pause before you respond. You may hear something and now there's this quick knee-jerk reaction. Oh, that's okay. I'm going to say that. I got that all set up. That's great. I'm glad you said that. Boom. Pausing does two things. It gives you a chance to kind of recalculate what it is you want to say based on what you've heard, but it also tells that other person you're listening because you didn't jump right in with what you wanted to say. You may even pause and reflect back on them. Oh, I can see this is really important to you, or I can see how this is kind of an emotional issue for you. or I can see how this affected your team, or I can see that's how, so whatever. And they now know, yes, that person's really intentionally listening to me. So intentional listening is something we have to work on. It's something we have to practice. It doesn't just happen. There's very, very few people, I'm sure you can back this up with your own experience through your life. There's very few people you meet who are natural, great listeners, who naturally make that person the most important person in the room. Ty Boyd was one of those people. He's just that natural kind of person who made other people important. But there's not many of us like that, us. There's not many people like that. I don't necessarily put myself in that category. So intentional listening. Here's the great way to put into practice intentional listening. Here's a great thing to do. Go home or whatever, get together. When you get together with your spouse, significant other, mother, father, best friend, whatever it is, the person that you hang out with the most. And when you're with them at the right time over a glass of wine or dinner or what have you, or just sitting talking about things, turn and look at that person and say, tell me something that's important to you that you've never told me before. Now, after you pick them up off the floor because they fainted that you actually asked them something like that, listen, do your intentional listening based on what they say. We do this exercise sometimes in company workshops, and we have people pair off, and each person takes turns talking about something they've either never talked about or don't rarely talk about. And it's amazing how people really listen. And then afterwards, the experience of the listener is more powerful than the person who shared the information. We've had people say, after I've done this, and now I don't think I've ever listened to anybody before. This opens up a whole new world. So that's a great way to get into a practice of intentional listening with somebody who's important to you. Questions on intentional listening? Super important, super hard to do. All right, now we're going to talk about what we came here for, managing that tough conversation. What makes a conversation a challenging, difficult conversation? There's a big emotional element in it, right? Every difficult conversation has an emotional element to it. So we have to recognize that. You have to understand that, and you have to try to minimize that. The first rule of dealing, and by the way, there's two types of these difficult discussions. One is the one that you plan for. I know we set this meeting up 2 weeks ago. This is going to be a tough situation with this person. We know this, so we got time to plan for this. And we got time to strategize for it. The other is you meet somebody in the hallway or at the coffee machine. And they're like, hey, John, 2 weeks ago you did this and it really ticked me off. You put me in a really bad spot. I need to understand why you did that and what we're going to do about that. Now you're kind of, wow, here it is. I don't have any time to plan for this. So there's a couple of different things that you have to do in that situation. First, let's talk about the one you can plan for. First rule, 4 words, not about me. When you go into a tough conversation, a pre-planned tough conversation, what are you thinking? I need to win this. This has to come out in my favor. This has to come out the way I want it to come out. So everybody know Dr. Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. There's 2 rules that Stephen Covey has that apply here. The first is rule number 4, think win-win. When you're planning for a difficult conversation, don't think, how am I going to win this? Think, how are we going to both win? How can I go into this thinking about a solution, an outcome to this situation where we're both going to be happy, where we're both going to get something out of it? I find very few people do that in these situations. They think they have to win this, or they have to at least come out better than the other person, because it's about them. Not about you. How are we going to do win-win? The second of Dr. Covey's rules, number 5, seek first to understand, then to be understood. Not about me. It's about the other person. How do we put that into play? there's a very important phrase that I encourage you to practice in difficult conversations. Okay, we've got this tough conversation we planned last week. I'm glad you could make it. I know this is something that's been sitting out there for quite a while. We've got to come to a solution. So we're going to talk about it today. You start. That's the phrase, you start. Let the other person begin. Let them vent. Let them say what they want to say. Most importantly, let them get their emotions out on the table. Because you remember I said the emotions make it a difficult conversation, so we've got to deal with that first. Let's acknowledge it. Let's see it, package it. Let's see if we can move it to the side so we can now talk about a possible win-win solution. You start is something you need to employ every time. Now, we're together, we've said that, you start, that person's talking. Now what do I do? Intentional listening. This is when you fall back on what I just talked about, intentional listening. You need to understand that's the most important person in your world right now. You have preconceived notions of how this is going to go. You have information about what caused this situation and made it difficult. There's all kinds of things you can think about, but right now you need to just listen to what they're saying. Listen to them vent. Listen to them be emotional. And it may be tough because they may be saying things directly at you. This is your fault. This is something you did to me. That's okay. Listen to it. Don't react. Listen. Intentional listening. All the things that I talked about, the 4 or 5 steps of intentional listening. Now, we've listened. It's your turn to talk. In your strategy and preparation for this difficult discussion, I want you to come up with options. Try to come up with different ways we could resolve this. It's not just one thing. Because if it's just one thing, then it's somebody's going to win and somebody's going to lose. If I only come into this with one way we're going to solve this problem, this situation, that means the other person's not going to like it. And if that person, let's say you know the situation, you know how they're going to respond, you got a good idea, they're going to say, I think we should do this, and you know that's not possible. Then you should be ready to say, I appreciate that that's the way you want to do it. Frankly, that's not possible because, and explain why, and now bring in your option. Here's something else I've been thinking about, another way we could approach this, where we both come out of this with something, and you lay that out. What do you think? If you don't have that option, then you're stuck. It's just a battle of who's going to win. So make sure you have options. The last step, you've discussed options. It's kind of going well, but you got to agree on the next step. See if you can come together on the next step. Here's what we do now to solve this. And it's generally expected in a pre-planned difficult conversation, there's going to be an outcome from this. Both parties have had time to think about it. You've both had time to prepare information or background or what have you. Both parties should be expecting there's going to be a resolution. So together, agree on the next steps towards that resolution. Those are the basic fundamental principles of handling difficult conversations. Now they're challenging. It's hard because there's emotion involved from you as well. It's not just emotion from the other person. You are emotionally invested in this. That's what makes this difficult. But if you follow those steps and practice those steps, you'll find that these things tend to work out easier and better. Now let's switch for a second to the non-planned difficult conversation. You're just confronted with somebody, and they want to talk about this right now. Most of the steps are the same. Most of the steps are the same. Number one, it's not about you. Number two, think win-win. Number three, you start. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. Number four, intentional listening. The same. Here's where it gets different. When there's a spontaneous, difficult conversation, there's not an expectation of a resolution. So instead of agreeing on the next step, the next part of handling that kind of conversation is agree on a next discussion. That person vents. They tell you why they're mad or what the situation is. You listen. You come back with something that, from your standpoint, this is what you've seen. This is how you thought it went. And then you agree, yeah, we've got differing views here. Let's agree to meet again. Let's agree next Tuesday. Let's have lunch. Let's take it again the next step. Let's talk about this again. Because I need to, frankly, go back and research some stuff about this event. And maybe you do too. Now, what that's done is, that's taken a lot of the emotion out of it. The emotion has been expended in this spontaneous discussion. Now, when you get together the next time, it's less emotional, it's more factual, it's more process-oriented. So on the difficult conversation, when you don't have it planned, when it's spontaneous, that last step is not agree on the next step, it's agree to meet again, to carry this discussion forward. Because that person, again, the resolution is not expected. Does that make sense? Questions about that? Reactions? No? Talkative group, you got to work on your communications. I want to give you, I'm going to close now and give you a couple of templates that we use in our program that we recommend you think about in terms of formulating your thoughts when you've got a difficult conversation and you're going to strategize on how you're going to deal with this. So one of them is called PREP. It's P-R-E-P. And PREP means the first P is state your position. This is what I feel we should do about this. R is what are your reasons for that position? The E in PREP stands for examples or evidence that back up your reasoning. So you're building a case about why you feel this way. And after you've done that, after you've stated your case and bring the reasons and the evidence, you come back and you restate your position. That's why I feel we should take this approach to resolve this. So it's an easy format to think about collecting your thoughts. The second one is we call SOS. It's the International Cry for Help. SOS is stating the situation so that both parties understand, yeah, we're on the same page. This is the situation. This is where we are. This is the problem we're facing. The O stands for options. Here's the things I think, here's some ways that we can approach solving this. We could do this. Option A, option B is this, option C is that. And then the final S is come back with your preferred solution. Of those three, I think option B is the best because. So again, come into this thing with options. I think SOS is a really useful way to come to talk about that. The final one we call PPF. And PPF is very simply, the first P is the past. Now this is what happened with the situation that got us to this point. The next P is the present. Here's where we are. This is what we're faced with. And this is the challenge that we have in solving this. The F is the future. What are we going to do next? And it's an easy formula to remember because everything has a past, present, and future. So this is what we did that brought us here. Here's what we're doing now. Here's what we're faced with. This is where we should go to resolve this. Again, 3 easy formulas, easy templates for you to use in kind of putting together your thoughts into a coherent discussion. We all face these difficult, challenging conversations in our workplace, at home, what have you. And I found, I bet you, if you think about it, you found that what makes them so difficult is we allow our ego and our emotions to get involved. We want to win. We don't want to give up this point. Our ego says, defend yourself. And so that's the way we kind of go in with our gloves up, ready to fight, instead of open arms. Let's talk about this. Here's some options. How can we both win in this situation? And I really want to listen to what you have to say. You start. It's been my experience that it works. So I encourage you to try it. What questions do you have about any of this, about communications? Yeah,
So, one of my questions, can you repeat the question too?
sure, absolutely.
Or
Yes.
just use the microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry. So this has been really great. I wish I could have the whole day with you. But would you agree that when it comes to managing, and I like what you pointed out, you said that in your experience of working with many managers, there were only four, four effective leaders or effective managers. Do you think that that's tied into their psychology, how they grew up in their childhood? Because I find that in my interaction with many managers and leaders in my professional development career of 45 years, the great managers, they came from a childhood of what they were great memories, and they were taught by their examples how to be effective in communication, how to be intentional listeners, and all these other things that we have discussed. But then you have people in leadership positions that came from a background that perhaps they were overly criticized. They were taught, you do not speak, we don't want to hear you. And now they're in these positions where they're not effective leaders, and the department is suffering from that lack of leadership, lack of communication, lack of mentoring, and the department is falling apart because of these traits. So how would someone that is an effective leader, that doesn't have that responsibility, can bring that forth to her boss or his boss and say exactly what you said? I mean, there's got to be a way you can bring that forth, but you got to deal with that aspect, that emotional aspect, that baggage, for lack of a better word, that they're bringing into the workplace.
I believe it's been my experience that people generally get into a leadership position, and that four-word phrase I told you, it's not about you, changes to it is about me. And their ego takes over. This is my, oh wow, I'm in a leadership position. I got the corner office, you know, I got a big salary advance. They put me in charge of all these people. They gave me all this responsibility. Aren't I great? And guess what? I'm now going to make decisions so I can keep that position. And I find that's why there's so few leaders, because leadership is hard. Leadership means it's not about me, it's about my team. Leadership means I make decisions based on what's good for the team, even though in the short term, it may not look good for me. Or I'm taking a risk because this person on my team brought this up, they're excited about it. I feel like they can do it, but I'm not sure. And what happens is most people that are in that position say, if I'm not sure, I'm not going there. Because if it doesn't work out, guess who gets the blame? And they chicken out and they revert to, I'm going to protect my backside. So the leaders are the ones that step forward and go, yeah, hey, that's a great idea, run with it. Let me know how I can help. Doesn't work out? Okay, what did we learn? So that's why I think you have so few leaders. As far as how do you communicate that, that's tough. And I found in very rare instances that if somebody is of that mindset, they don't change because they want to protect what they have. And it's not worth it to them. Again, they don't, when I talk about having pain, they don't have any pain that way. It's all good. You know, I'm making decisions based on me. I'm making sure that we do everything so I can stay in this seat and I can keep making this money. So they don't have any pain. So it's hard. What I suggest to people who are of the other, it's not about me, just lead by example. But do the things you do with that in mind, and your success will be demonstrated, and people see that. And they'll say, oh, wow, look at all she's getting done. And she's all about her people. All she talks about is her team. And your teammates will elevate you on their shoulders. Because when they talk about people, they'll say, God, you can't believe Jane. Jane is amazing. She's so supportive. All she ever does is she wants us to succeed. And they talk about that with other people. So then the higher ups who have an opportunity to hire a new executive They look down in the ranks and they go, oh, here's Jane. Everybody talks about Jane with glowing remarks and can't look at her success record. Her people love her. And here's another person that's got a success record, but nobody's talking about how they love her. Which one are they going to take? That's how you get elevated in the organization. Your people rise you up. Yes.
We have a couple questions online. First, it says, if I follow a win-win in a difficult conversation, what do I do if the other person's tone is accusational, complaining, and always wants to win?
Yeah, it's not unusual. First of all, the intentional listening is really important for that. And so you can listen for why they're emotional, where that's coming from, and understand and try to identify that's where their pain point is. And it may not be what you think it is. So by that intentional listening, you realize, oh, they're really upset because of this. I wasn't even aware of that. And that can create different options for your win-win suggestions. And I think at some point, it has to come to a conclusion. There has to be a decision made. And often in that situation, so that you're not the bad person, if the only way it can work out is that person is not in that person's favor, have a third party step in and say, look, I'm objective. I'm not, I'm looking at this from the outside, but this is the way this has to go. So you're not the bad person. But it's really important to understand where the emotion's coming from.
Thank you. And also, what books would you recommend to continue education on communication skills?
There's a book called The $1 Million Toolbox. And The $1 Million Toolbox was written by Ty Boyd. How about that? But it's a great book about using your toolbox, what you have already inside you, your abilities, your voice, your gestures, the way you command a room, all those kinds of things that can help you be a better, not just communicator, but presenter. So I think that's one that is very valuable. It's the first one I'd recommend.
All right. Right now, that's all online. Anybody else?
Anyone else? Out on the table. So Ty Boyd, we do a program called Executive Excellence in Speaking Institute. It's a 2.5-day program that gets people up on their feet and makes you more comfortable doing presentations, but really communicating a lot of the things I've talked about. We also do individual coaching with executives, salespeople, leaders, and we do workshops for companies where we'll go on site and customize it for whatever particular things you guys might be dealing with. We just did one in Texas for a large company on this very subject. Their salespeople had trouble with difficult customer conversations, and we did a whole half a day on that with them. So actually a full day. So lots of different things we can do that we'd love to talk to you about if you think we can help you. I really appreciate your attentiveness, your time this morning, driving through the traffic to get here. I wish you a safe and prosperous day, and it's been a joy being with you. Thank you very much.